Now I realize how pointless it is for me to make a video that is addressed at women. However, while it is true that the issues outlined in this video happen primarily to men, they can happen to anyone, and they do all of the time. So whenever I say men or women, you can just assume that what I mean is primarily men and primarily women, but also in any given individual situation, it could be any gender that you can come up with. I don't know why I have to say this explicitly, but if I don't, somebody's gonna say something stupid. So on an individual level, you will probably be able to gain something from this video, even if it is just a better understanding of yourself. All that being said, we are gonna talk about some heavier topics here, like sexual assault and emotional abuse, so if you are not comfortable with that, maybe take a deep breath and consider if you want to keep going. I promise it won't get very explicit. So the trope of men being unable to open up emotionally to anyone, especially their partners, isn't one that just came out of nowhere. It's pretty accurate that most men put up these massive walls around themselves, and then the women in their lives, usually their romantic partners, try to circle them in order to find a door, and then often there isn't a door, and they basically have to tear the walls down. This doesn't mean that all men are stone-faced stoics. There's a lot of different ways that you can put up emotional walls. Some men will wear masks, be boisterous, pretend to feel completely different things from the things that they actually feel, deflect everything with humor, or just straight up retreat into a shell of not saying shit the moment that their veil is pierced. It can be very frustrating to deal with this, especially because those men still crave emotional intimacy. We like to pretend that we don't, that we are a rock, we are an island, and islands don't cry, but it's not true. And the only people we're lying to is ourselves. It can seem as though they are just utterly terrified of opening up even a little bit, which is actually 100% what is happening. But why? Why are men so scared to be emotionally vulnerable with you, dear viewer? After all, you're a perfectly nice person, and you would never ever do anything to harm them. Well, you are not the problem. After essentially years of having thought about this, and having had a lot of conversations with a lot of different people, I've come to the conclusion that the best way of explaining this to women who don't understand it is through something that they experience themselves, and which works similarly in many ways. An analogy of empathy, you might say. You know how you are probably afraid of getting sexually assaulted, even though the chances of that happening are pretty low? It's like that. Sexual assault is something that women are much more likely to be the victims of than men, and though it is obviously very unlikely to happen to any given individual, and the overwhelming majority of women go through life with that never happening to them, it's not getting killed in a terrorist attack levels of it being unlikely to happen to you. Every woman, and obviously also every man, knows at least one woman who was the victim of sexual assault at some point in their life. That is in absolute numbers, not a lot. However, it makes the thing real. It is something that can actually realistically happen to you in your life, and therefore you think about it, because that's a smart thing to think about. The average woman is also physically a lot weaker than the average man. This is also a statistical fact, and it plays a huge role in how they feel more vulnerable. Which I think is also ultimately the emotional factor that leads this to being as important as it is, the feeling of defenselessness, because people don't really think in statistics. After all, every other type of violent crime, men are way more likely to be affected. Yet, even though that is the case, we don't really go down the dark street at night fearing for our lives and feeling physically vulnerable to most of the people that we meet. This is why women are selective and careful about who they find themselves in isolated situations with, and who they would rather be in the presence of only, while in the protection of also other people being there As well they might. In other words, if a woman is alone with you, it's probably because she trusts you enough that you won't rape her. Or she knows she can beat the shit out of you. That might also be the case. Now, of course, the overwhelming majority of men would never do such a thing. The very idea revolts them to their core. That doesn't change the fact that it's not at all imprudent for women to be careful about what kind of situations they put themselves in. It is intelligent threat assessment and management, something that people do all of the time. Now, I want to make clear that I'm not here to weigh in on what is worse, sexual assault or emotional abuse. I think especially with things that are as emotionally laden as these, where everyone will have their individual experiences and things that they empathize more with, I don't really see the point of trying to be the biggest victim. Though they tend to go hand in hand, they are both quite different things, and they are both quite terrible. They are, however, analogous enough that we can use them to gain understanding for each other. Where men tend to have the physical upper hand, women tend to have the emotional upper hand. I know we as a society hate to admit this, but it's true. Not only do women tend to be more in touch with their emotions and better at managing them than men, they're also much more skilled at wielding them as weapons to get what they want. In expert circles, we call this manipulation. And just to point this out, right, just swallowing your emotions, pressing them down and putting them in some chest that you then put away into the back recess of your mind does not count as managing your emotions. And much like every woman knows another woman that has been the victim of sexual assault, every man knows another man who has been the victim of emotional abuse. You don't even need to dig deep to find very public opinions of women who celebrate this kind of shit. How they just really want men to open up to them so they can use their insecurities against them in the next fight that they have. How they really just want to dig their way into their hearts so they can control them. One of the most disgusting conversations that I have ever had in my entire life was with a young woman who told me that she really likes just making men trust her and confide in her emotionally. Best case scenario, she digs something up and they start to cry. This then leads her to finding them immediately utterly unattractive and scolding them for being emotional little bitches, and then also leaving them and telling them that they just weren't manly enough to handle her, and that really they are just worthless human beings who don't deserve to be with a woman or anyone, and that nobody should love them. This makes her feel powerful, and therefore it is justified, because things that make you feel good are always justified. Now, if you've ever wanted to know what men feel like when they hear about other men thinking that sexual assault is a-okay and that they were asking for it, and so on and so forth, the exact thing that you're feeling toward this kind of woman right now, that is how we feel toward those kind of men. Because of course you don't think that's okay, of course you don't think that's justified. You're a good person. You think that shit is utterly revolting. The very idea of doing anything like it would never even cross your mind. And even if it did, you would be disgusted with yourself and never actually do it. This fear that men have of being emotionally vulnerable with women is created by a small handful of women who have exploited that vulnerability exactly the same way that women's fear of being physically vulnerable with men has been created by a small handful of men who have exploited that. Interestingly enough, most women do actually like the idea of feeling physically vulnerable toward a man that they can fully trust, and the same is true about emotional vulnerability. Trust and love are just very nice things. And if right now you're thinking, but how, instead of emotionally abusing and manipulating men, am I gonna get what I want from them? Imagine a dude saying, but how, if I don't sexually assault women, am I supposed to get what I want from them? Neither of these thought processes are cool and normal. It is true, though, that there are a lot of people who engage in emotional abuse and they don't even know it. And if they do know it, they're not really aware that it is a wrong thing to do. And this is true about sexual assault as well. Usually those people tend to be victims of abuse or assault of their own. But what can we do about this? Well, it turns out we should probably use the same tactics that we should use to help victims of sexual assault. I mean, you know, obviously sexual assault is largely illegal. And I'm not sure it's a great idea to make emotional abuse illegal. That would probably open up a bit of a fucky slippery slope. But there are some things that parallel a lot with what we should do, primarily and most importantly, destigmatizing victimhood. It's very important not to judge and stigmatize the victims of these kinds of crimes, and to put them in contact with expert resources that help them overcome their trauma so that it doesn't, you know, negatively affect their lives anymore. Giving people the permission to be victims and giving them permission to heal are both things that don't really happen very often, both with victims of emotional abuse and victims of sexual assault, unfortunately. Teaching people emotional awareness and emotional self-defense, very important things to do, much like everyone should have at least some understanding of real-world tactical awareness and real-world self-defense. It would just massively reduce the number of victims, which, I mean, if that isn't your ultimate goal, I don't know what to say except go fuck yourself. Because, you know, teaching the bad people not to do the bad thing is, of course, something that needs to be done, but it's only gonna get you so far, and that far is not very far. Most of the ones that are actually really problematic, they know that other people consider what they're doing wrong. They just don't care. And there needs to be more awareness of this too, which plays into the whole destigmatization thing. Bystanders need to be able to detect and intervene when it becomes clear that something is going on. And if you have someone in your life who is in such a situation, help them out. It's difficult, it's frustrating, it's sometimes quite volatile, but it is worth it considering that you are massively improving the well-being of your fellow human. The unfortunate fact of the matter is that it requires only one asshole to, like, permanently scar someone for life in ways that they will never fully recover from. And the only thing that you really can do is just not be that asshole. Everything else does not come with a silver bullet. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities, but do not spam them. Consider supporting me on Patreon or Subscribestar, maybe buying some of my merchandise or my short story collection. And in that spirit, I really want to reiterate that I'm not trying to compare the badness of two things here, which again, I don't find that that is ever productive in any way. The only thing I'm trying to achieve here is make people understand each other. And see you around, cunts.